I'm sort of slightly concerned by the number of people who look like they might possibly be graphic designers here. And I don't know what this is going to do for you, really, apart from perhaps give you some grain of comfort at the end of it. So there'll be a lot of stuff that's probably familiar to you and probably less familiar to people who aren't graphic designers. So that's just my kind of, proviso. But it's really inspired by that call that we all get saying, how much do you charge for a logo? And in most of those cases, they really should ask, can you do a logo for a couple of £100? In which case, it would just be so much more simple because you could just say no. So I'm just going to talk in the next few minutes, really, about why they should not cost £136, why they probably shouldn't be free, and why they almost certainly don't cost £136 million, which I will come back to you. So ask Google, what do logos cost? And you kind of come across various iterations of this list, which is really quite unhelpful in answering the question, but it does emphasise how difficult it is to answer. It does start to define what worth might be. In this case, not simply what it costs, but what it actually does for the company. And also starts to define the kind of companies who need big, expensive logo work. And they are, as you will very well know, companies that need instant recognition to stand out from a crowded marketplace. And a logo will actually create commercial worth if it means that recognition makes you choose that person to give you a home insurance quote or that kind of Pepsi. It's actual commercial worth. And obviously, being in the business that I'm in, I think visual identity is important for everyone and all entities and all companies. However, you've got to have the product and the service to be brilliant, to back up your brilliant, fantastic, expensive logo. Otherwise, it's not going to give the business any worth. I just thought this is our favouritely named chicken and pizza restaurant in Hackney. So if Chick Piz ring you up wanting a logo, just pass them on to someone else, probably. And the other thing that this list says about worth and logos is whereabouts that logo might arrive in a life cycle. And you can pick the odd one out here in terms of value, which is, of course, Nike. And all you graphic designers will know the lovely tale about the Nike logo costing $35. Do you know that? Does everyone know that story? Nodding, shaking heads, no. Well, Phil Knight, when he was setting up, was teaching at Portland State University, teaching accountancy, strangely, and he saw some girl, as she was then, doing an assignment and went and said, I'm starting up this company, it's called Blue Ribbon at the moment, but I've got to place an order in China and haven't got a logo, can you do something? So she said, yeah, I'll do something for $35, and she didn't do that one. She did that one, and he said, he said, I don't love it, but it will grow on me. And of course, it grew on everyone. And I kind of think that's fine. He just needed something quickly, and, he paid her money. He did then employ her and give her a diamond ring with a swoosh engraved on it, which sounds ghastly, but and lots of trainers and what have you. So that $35, you can kind of forgive that. Then BP, these are the people who were alleged to spend £136 million when they rebranded. So it was kind of a big deal because they already were a Fortune 10 company. They already had 100,000 employees. They operated in 100 countries. So it was quite a big deal. And that money is a huge chunk of work, completely reframing a company, completely researching, designing, rolling out the brand, painting petrol stations and all that stuff. So that's why when you see those awful headlines, that it didn't cost that, the whole thing cost that. Another example I really like of worth against value was Andersen Consulting, who in 2001 they had to rebrand because they wanted to become independent from Andersen worldwide. And they really did the job properly. They got a list of 500 alternatives. They employed linguistic experts in 47 countries. They worked across 200 languages, making sure that, what they chose didn't mean dickhead in, Malaysian or whatever. And then they took 6,000 TV slots, 1,000 print ads, and they spent $175 million on the campaign. And it worked really well for them. But the name that was chosen was just an employee who submitted it on a kind of put your suggestion in the box. So that bit of it, didn't cost him anything, which is lovely. And I wonder if he got a bonus that year, which you'd kind of hope that he might. So this is the thorny question, which I'm probably not going to answer, but how do you charge for creative work? Do you work out a day rate? Do you charge per the hour? Does the size of your client affect what you charge them? And Alan Fletcher of V&A fame, for people who don't know, says, think of a number, think of the right number, then double it. If the client doesn't have a sharp intake of breath, then you've shot too low. So that's a good one to bear in mind. But I also really like what Pentagram's Michael Beirut said. He said, speaking as someone who enthusiastically sold out, every time I've done something just for the money, no matter how much they paid, it was never enough. And that's a really good thing to remember when you're thinking, why am I doing this for this money? So Creative Review, they helped me a lot by publishing what they consider to be their top 20 logos last month, which is really sort of logos for logo designers. And this is number 1. They didn't really focus on cost, but there were some kind of neat little stories about it. This is the Woolmark logo. And the person who designed that never got a penny for it. And there's a kind of big debate about who that person who actually designed it was. It was attributed to someone called Saroglia, but there's no evidence of him anywhere else existing. And they think actually it was designed by someone who found himself on the judging jury, so couldn't claim for it and never got the prize. And I've actually asked them what the prize money was and what happened to it, but they're looking in their archives in Sydney. And another competition, which we do know a bit more about the money, this was for Deutsche Bank in 1974, and they gave the participants 3,000 Deutschmarks each to participate in the competition, and they gave the winner 20,000 Deutschmarks. And weirdly, that converts to approximately the sterling values today, which means that Anton Stankovsky's design has cost them 600 quid a year since then. And their pre-tax targeted profits this year are 10 billion euros. So 600 quid is quite a small amount of that money. But at the time, it was really quite outrageous, and it was also quite radical. And there was a headline in the Bild Zeitung saying, outrage at painter paid 100,000 marks with 5 lines, which sounds kind of familiar, doesn't it? Those stories kind of come up quite often, don't they? And unfortunately, the poor guy made things even worse for himself by saying, sometimes it only takes me a second. So that didn't really help him. Recently, they have fiddled with this, and this is the resulting logo. And it's interesting because that's what he actually proposed initially, and they said, no, you've got to stick Deutsche Bank on it, otherwise people won't recognise it. So that's quite a nice little end piece to that. Milton Glaser admits this took him 10 seconds. Jerry Barney did this sitting on the tube on the back of an envelope on his way to work. So this is kind of, you sort of worry about the value of the work. And I don't know, he worked for the design research unit at the time, and I don't know what they were paid, but they did a huge amount of work. I think they designed 50 symbols. They went down to a short list of 6, then they had 2, and in those days it was pre-computer modelling things. So they actually had to take those 2 logos and weave those ghastly carpets that you get on train seats and hang curtains and design posters and everything so they can make the decision. And at the last minute, the other one was leaked, so they had to use that. So I'm just going to go on now to why they shouldn't cost 136 quid. But you can, of course, buy a logo for 100 quid. And there are no shortage of online companies offering cheap or indeed free logos. So Inc. magazine last year did this exercise where they actually got someone to go through a rebrand using 4 different providers and then sort of measure the experience. So these are from 4 different providers, and they're all it's different level of interaction. So if you pay $69, you get 2 designers to work on it. If you pay $149, you get 5 designers to work on it, which is quite bad if you're a designer. And the next one down was actually free. You can just choose images and shove them together and what have you. Anyway, this is what he chose. It's awful quality because it's come from the internet. This is what he chose. And I think it's really interesting. It cost him $429, but he looked at 250 custom logos, which is a lot. That's a day's work, So I'm not sure whether that's really good value. And they then asked Stephen Heller, who was the art editor of the New York Times for 30 years and has written widely about graphic design, what he thought. And he said, well, it's not terrible. It's not terrible design, but it's so template. It's just like a template. It really could be, it could really work for anything. It's not, it doesn't have that special quality that logos are supposed to have. They're supposed to be mnemonic. They're supposed to have that moment of, ah, you know, I get it. So that's his sort of conclusion. These are two of our logos, which I'll quickly put in as examples, good examples, of logos that have something that makes you kind of go, oh yeah, yeah, I get it now. And I want to talk about another free option, crowdsourcing, which you guys know all about. And this is a friend and ex-colleague of mine who runs a social media company in London. And they'd done a project with MTV and the European Parliament around social media and getting people to vote more in European elections. And suddenly lots of work was coming in and they needed to be a proper company and have a proper logo, and they wanted to do something quick. So they went to Amazon's Mechanical Turk, and they posted a job asking for letters to be designed, paying $1 a letter. And within 15 minutes, they had their first A, and within 4 hours, they had 40 letters. So it was just job done. And it was such a good example because it really uses what they're selling. They're all about social media and interaction and what have you. So it works really well for them. And you can still go to their site and design your letter and upload it, and then they encourage you to use it in your portfolio and link to it and all the rest of it. So that's a kind of warm, fuzzy crowdsourcing moment. And just to give some contrast to that, and not a particularly warm, fuzzy crowdsourcing moment, this competition that was run by Adobe to find a new logo for their community. And the profession was just so pissed off about it because they felt like these people were providing software that we use. We're supposed to be the professionals that they're supporting, and they're not supporting us. They don't value our work. And also that it was such a bad example to other companies that you can say, you can just throw a bone to graphic designers and they'll all sort of jump on it and, oh yeah, great, we need exposure, we'll do that for nothing. And that brought me to this wonderful, that's the logo they chose. This is just brilliant, and probably some of you have seen this, I guess. Have people seen this? Should I work for free? I will post it somewhere tomorrow. But it's just fantastic if you follow the kind of thing. And if you follow it for that particular example, it's the answer you get to is, no, this is the most toxic line of bullshit anyone will ever feed you. But I particularly love the, yippee, the promise of more cheap free work. So I think everyone should have that on their wall, really. So Harold, who's disappeared, strangely, has said he'd like to know how designers get from the brief to the logo. And most of you will know that you can't explain that kind of creative process really very well. But you can look at what sort of frames that. And I'm just going to give you a little example. And it's really research as to where that logo is going to sit in terms of the sort of brand landscape and the visual landscape. Not, incidentally, what colours do you like, which is what the online options will offer you. Because what colours you like is nothing to do with what colour your logo should be. Of course, I shouldn't even need to tell you guys that. So we did a logo for Lowestoft Sixth Form College, a new Sixth Form College. So you would expect somebody doing this kind of work to look at all these other logos, to look at the other visual influences on the project, this is the architect's influence, to look at their environment and surroundings, and to design a logo that pulls that together and does something special for them. So this is the other work that we've done for them. So I'm going to kind of conclude and wrap up by looking at how this all fits together. And I have to credit Tom here for helping with this, but this is the solution. This is what your money is paying for when you set your budget for graphic design. But you've got to allow the graphic designer to do some thinking and doing and scribbling and what have you. And you've got to allow them to do some research and looking at what other people are doing. And you hope that you're going to buy their really good experience, and you're going to get all the 20 years of looking at graphic design magazines and reading about semiotics at college and loving typography and all that stuff, which you'll get whether you pay for it or not. So this is your budget. This is what your budget is paying for. It might be £2,000, it might be £5,000, it might be £50,000. But that bit in the middle, that solution bit, if that takes, you know, Jerry Barney, you know, 10 seconds or whatever, you can't charge for 10 seconds. And the reason that that's happened so neatly is because of all that other stuff. And what that other stuff does is to sort of reduce the risk of not coming up with a solution. People say to us, well, how will I know that I'll like it? You know, and it's like, well, because you're buying all that stuff, you're buying all the experience, all the research, all the thinking and doing, you know, that's what you're buying, that's what you're spending your money on. So that for the graphic designers here, I hope that gives you some comfort and some way of showing your clients what they're paying for, even if it happens, that solution happens to come up in a second. And this kind of little sort of thing this is your neighbour's nephew who really likes Photoshop and might do something for you for nothing, because he might come up with that, but it's really unlikely because he doesn't have this, okay? Don't forget that, that's really important. And finally, a little story. I used to work for Tim Lamb, who ran Lamb and Shirley, graphic designers in the 80s, and they were quite big, and they did M&S, and he did the first Next directory, and he was quite big, and he was asked to design the Cats logo poster. It was around 1980, and he was offered, what, you can have the money or you can have a percentage profit share, and he thought, musical Cats, I'll take the money, thanks. And it only took him a weekend, and he quite enjoyed it, and you know, so there it is. We're all so familiar with it, of course. And a few years ago, when he was sort of downsizing his life a bit, he looked at what the percentage would have netted him, and it was between £7 and £11 million. So sometimes you just got to have faith that people prancing around in tights, you know, with cat masks on, you just don't know. So that's it. That's all, folks. I'd hand you over to Harry, but oh, he's there. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah.
You can have questions.
Oh, questions. Yes, sorry. Yes, Tim, hi. Hi.
I get provided logos from clients all the time, which simply don't work in video. And I wonder when you're thinking up a logo for a company, whether you think one for print, one for video now, as it's so prolific on the web.
Scott?
Yes, that's part of if you go back to the low stuff, looking at the landscape, where it's going to fit in, that can be definitely taken some time. That was from thought from the beginning, but if it was something critical later on, then
Yeah, you could be missing a trick. You could charge them twice. You see, you could charge them for their print one, and then say, well, you need something bolder and fatter if you're going to have any video promo. And charge them again for that, because I often find I get asked to rework something for video, thinking that they think it's 10 minutes to make a very sort of thin sans serif something or other actually appear in 72 dpi.
Yeah.
But it has to go back to a designer.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point.
To do something properly.
Yeah.
Fatten it up.
Yeah.
Is that not down to the original brief though? If they know what it wants to be used for.
They don't think, when they go to a graphic designer and say, can you do me a logo, they only think print, they don't think video.
I think good graphic designers, I have to stand up graphic designers and say at that point, they should be looking at where it's going, whether it's going to be used. Because nowadays, no one comes to us saying they want work for print only.
we see it on the screen, so it needs to work on the screen.
It's a very different thing.
Yeah, good point.
Following on from that, do graphic designers, obviously are working with technology today, so in the 80s it was all print, and 90s there is some computers, and today it's YouTube videos and Flash videos and Facebook pages. Do you expect a good graphic designer to come up with a logo which will come up with technology which doesn't yet exist, or do you expect companies to have to rebrand every 20, 30 years?
Yeah, we're not future-proof. Well, we're not that future-proof. Also, we're not paid enough to be that future-proof. I mean, you have is that fair, Scott? I mean, if you've got a company now, you want to have a logo, and it's definitely going to be used on the internet, and you're going to use it in I don't know what,
Well, that would work
you
with
know.
3D technology.
Yeah, 3D. Yeah. Well, that would, but you know, so you can only kind of do as much as is in that brief. You can't say, well, hold on a minute, because in 10 years' time you might be working in holographic spaces. We need to be. You can't do that. I think was that fair, Scott? Yeah, yeah. Any other questions?
You're going to pay someone to do your logo and it's cost you a silly amount of money, and then all they come back with is the name of your company in a font, like
ABC
logo or something like that.
Yeah.
Do you then think, was this really worth it?
No.
You know,
What? No.
Is there like justification behind them just coming back with text, or should you always expect, you know, your company name plus a symbol?
No. I think actually the ABC logo is a really good example, which of course I haven't got a slide here, but it was designed by Paul Rand, and it was used for 50 years. You know, so when you go to a designer, you've got to pick the right designer. When you pick that person, you have to have faith that they're going to come back to you with the best solution for that project. So if they think that in that environment the best solution is typographical, you kind of have, well, you don't have to suck it up, but you don't go to your solicitor and say, do my divorce, and then they come back to you and you say, actually, I don't want you to do it like that. I want you to do it like this. Do you know what I mean? So you've got to kind of say, okay, well, you know, you've given me a typographical solution, so I have to kind of go with that. Because what they do is, you know, when you're looking at these kind of landscapes, and that this is not a good example of it actually, but say you're looking at banks, there's a really sort of strong visual, what do you call that, Scott? That sort of a vernacular. And it's all sort of lock and key and navy and red and all that kind of thing. So if your bank wants to stand out and be totally different, like Smile, for example, then you do that. But if you want to fit in and be part of that conservative landscape, that's your landscape, and that's why the designer is doing it for you and not your neighbour's nephew. But you can't, you know, you can supply good solutions to a client, and they can say, I don't want that, I really want a picture. And then you say, okay, fine, have a picture, but you know, it'll cost you more. It won't work for you, but you'll do it because, you know.
It just strikes me as you're speaking it. Actually, the secret is in getting the right brief.
The right brief.
A good brief, because you know, if you look at BP, that clearly had some objectives for that brand.
Yeah.
Went much beyond just find us a new, fresh, modern way of putting the initials BP on.
Absolutely.
It's communicating closer to nature
Yeah.
and all the things.
That's a massive change.
Yeah.
And actually,
I was just wondering whether you have hints and tips for getting a better brief out of your clients.
The way we work is it's a conversation with the client from start to finish, and we try and involve them in lots of stages along the way. So, you know, as part of the.
Because I bet you get some clients who just say, "I want a logo."
Oh yeah,
Don't
yeah,
understand,
yeah.
necessarily what they want
Yeah,
the logo
yeah.
to do or achieve.
Yeah.
Often we find the clients kind of have the answer in them. It's just sort of
They don't know
trying
how
to
to
get
do
that
that.
out.
Yeah, but that's why these online solutions kind of devalue the whole sort of profession, because it's not about what colours you like. It is about having a conversation and working that out. I mean, the brief for this piece of work, they wanted a rebrand, and this comes back to what you were saying actually. They wanted them to be, because it was BP merged with some other two other companies, I think, and they wanted a different name. But actually, once they'd done their research, they came back and said, you don't want a name, you want to be BP. I'm sure that still cost millions of pounds to be told you still need to be called BP, but that was an exercise they had to go through. You see what I mean? So yeah, a good brief is really important.
What are the circumstances that, you know, what are the right circumstances for a company to change its brand, its logo? Obviously, something seismic in the positioning of the company is an obvious example, but it's like, you know, especially for a smaller company, right? So you're not going to be able to do research to decide whether your logo is right or wrong, and you might have become tired of it. Or
Yeah.
Have you ever said no to someone who said, "I want a new logo," and you've gone, "No, you don't. That's is it."
I don't.
Is there a process the client should go through, or business should go through, to decide whether it's fine to?
Well, Scott might disagree with me, but I think it's normally that company is in a process of change or evolution. From not just like we're fed up with what we look like, but we are changing. Our offerings changing. We've bought somebody, we've merged, we've done something different, or we're about to do something different, and that needs to be reflected. I think there has to be a catalyst. Do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, there was a question of the sort of larger brand, isn't there? You know,
Yeah.
visual identity, which.
This is just a small part, obviously, of that kind of. But we did have a client. Well, they're not yet a client, and I'm not sure that they will ever become a client. But they came to us with this awful, terrible logo, and they wanted to do a lot of other work, website, catalogue, and all that kind of stuff. And the guy who came to us said, "Look, we know this logo is just terrible, but the owner did it, and he's really wedded to it, and you know." And Neil, you're here. I mean, how bad was it? It was really bad. So they said to us, "Well, look, there is a big body of work here. There is still a big body. One of you graphic designers might have taken these people on, but there's a big body of work. But the logo is the kind of sitting there in the corner." And we had this conversation, went round and round, and then he said eventually to Scott, "Look, would you consider doing this body of work with our logo?" And we said, "No, sorry. We couldn't put our name to it, you know. It was so fundamentally terrible and so fundamental to that, how we felt that they were going to then, you know, spend all this money and relaunch all this stuff. And it was still, you know, so.
Just to follow on about changing, because there's a company that I know that's recently changed their logo, changed their colours, and I don't think they've changed that much. I think their customers are actually quite confused now about why is it, you know, well, they've changed everything. And obviously the logo, everything's changed. I mean, if you were to change everything, would you keep something similar, or is it just completely free range?
I think that's probably so specific to the client, or the. I mean, look at Aviva. You know, their actual kind of the Norwich Union logo actually hasn't really changed that much in 100 years, really, because it's always been the spire. And even though their name's different, they've still got that spire. So I think that probably answers the question that unless you're going to do something totally evolve, yeah. Harry, you're obviously desperate to get up here.
You're just desperate.
Any other more questions?